Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about the story of Jaden, and it's a really hard story for me to tell. It makes me very emotional. I already want to cry talking about it, but I believe that sharing it, I don't think a lot of people realize what happens when you have a stillbirth, and I want people to know, to understand the story, and I think it gives a lot of insight to how people feel, why people feel certain ways after, and just what the actual process is. So I'm going to tell you the story of Jaden. It is my experience. I am not going to talk about Skylar very much in it. He was there. He witnessed it all. But his perspective is his perspective, and I can't put words in his mouth. So everything is my vision, my experience, and my feelings. Okay, so the story begins on April 24th of 2014. I had my 29-week appointment, which was supposed to be my 28-week appointment. My last appointment had been at the very beginning of April, so just a few weeks prior, probably 3 weeks prior, and everything was great at that appointment. I went into this appointment and my blood pressure was through the roof. I didn't feel it. I felt fine for the most part. But I went to the appointment and the doctor was like, your blood pressure is through the roof. We're going to have you. And he just started listing all these things they were going to do. They were going to start watching this. I was going to need to come in weekly for appointments, and they wanted to check my urine and all this stuff. And then he goes, you know what? I think we should throw you on an ultrasound. And Skylar was there with me, and he threw us on an ultrasound, and there was Jaden. Just still. Didn't move. And neither did his heart. And that's when the doctor told us, we're sorry, we cannot find a heartbeat. Or I can't find a heartbeat. There is no heartbeat. And those are the most painful words you can ever hear when you have a baby in you. When you miscarry and further down the road. I will say it is harder down the road because you've grown attached. You know, we had bought stuff, he had his car seat, we had clothes, we had a ton of stuff for him that we had, started getting ready for providing for this child. Okay, sorry, I had to move locations and I'm sitting on the bathroom floor because there's too much noise out there. Anyways, so they told us that he didn't have a heartbeat. And right then your whole entire world comes crashing down on you. I mean, you're kind of like, honestly, you're just thinking, what the F? Like, how can this be? I had just felt him moving. I had noticed a reduction in movement, but then everything was telling me, oh, they changed position, reduction in movement is normal. It is not normal, no. Reduced movement, no matter how big they're getting, is not normal. I'm gonna tell you guys that now. So you know. And so everything I had said online was that, so I was just kind of going with it. And then anyways, we got to the appointment. They told us he didn't have a heartbeat, and my world came crashing down. I remember walking out of the office, and we were upstairs, and I remember walking down, I remember walking down the stairs with Skylar, and there were there's electronic front doors that open, but you have to push the button to make them open. And I remember people were getting ready to walk in, and so I pushed it open for them, and I walked out of the hospital, and I fell to the curb, and I just started bawling. The doctor had told us we had to get to the hospital, we could go home and grab some stuff, but we needed to get to the hospital as soon as we could, because I was in a very dangerous state to where I could stroke out any moment, maybe seize, one or the other, from my blood pressure being too high. And so anyway, we got in the car, and I had to call my sister because that day she was supposed to mail out my baby shower invites. And so we got in the car, and I had to call her and tell her, no, she couldn't, don't mail them out. Hopefully I wasn't too late. And I wasn't. She was just getting ready to. So she didn't mail those out, and I told her, and I didn't say anything else. I told her she needed to call all of the family and we got to our apartment, and I remember I started feeling so sick, and I got to the toilet and I started dry heaving, and I didn't know what to grab because I didn't have a hospital bag packed because I was only 29 weeks. And so I started just grabbing stuff. Nothing made sense. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what to bring. I didn't know what to do. What do you do when your baby dies? And that's pretty much how that went. I literally, from there, getting to the hospital was a blur. I remember getting there and just feeling very monotone, very numb. And I remember sitting down, them checking me in, the nurses asking me a million questions, and they got me all hooked up. Because Jaden was already dead, they didn't have to worry about the medicines that they were giving me. At that point, they said that because he'd already passed, they just needed to get my blood pressure down before I started going into a deathly state. And so they worked on, sorry, my cat. And so they hooked me up. I got so sick. They were giving me all the medicines to drop my blood pressure. I was throwing up. I was shaking. I was hot. And I can remember seeing Skylar's face because he had never seen me like this. And I was so sick. And then the doctor came in. Once they finally got my blood pressure lowered, they put in an epidural, and they started giving me Pitocin to induce labor. When you have a late miscarriage or a stillbirth, you birth the baby like you normally would. Same process. Sometimes they do C-sections, sometimes they do the natural labor way, and so we did it the natural labor way. I don't know what time they started anything that day, is a complete blur, but I do know I had him at 12:02 a.m. on the 25th. And you guys, that drives me crazy because I get a morn for 2 days. I don't just have 1 day of mourning. I have the day they told me he passed, and then I get a mourn his actual birthday. And I hate that because I wish it just stuck the pain to 1 day, but it doesn't. And then I birthed him. And I can remember, I mean, it was the most painful labor I've ever had out of my other 2 kids. Jaden was my first, if you guys don't know, so I had no other kids at that time. But it was the most painful labor I had. I birthed him, and they wrapped him up, they cleaned him up, and they let me hold him. And I looked at him, and he was perfect. I mean, he was little. His head was the size of a baseball. This is the hat that they put on him. Here's a teddy bear in reference to me. This hat fits the teddy bear. And I mean, his head was about the size of a baseball, and it was very little, but he had hair, and he was so handsome and so little. He was just barely over 2 pounds, and he was 14 inches long. So they let me see him, but then they said that, I remember, I think after I had him, I actually think I needed oxygen. I remember at one point in the whole thing being put on oxygen because I couldn't breathe and my oxygen depleted. And so they took him away and they cleaned him up, and then I remember them bringing him back, but I remember the doctor also coming in and telling me that my levels were deadly. Like, I was basically dying, and they were giving me all these medications and stuff, and I didn't process then that I was sick or that I was dying. Like, I didn't process any of that. I was just stuck on the fact that my baby died. But retrospect, I've looked at all my numbers from when I was in the hospital then, and they were scary. My numbers for my liver, for everything, were very scary. But at a point, they brought back Jaden, and you are allowed, my hospital allows 6 hours. We spent 2 hours with him, and that was all I did. I I was afraid that the longer I spent with him, the harder it was going to be to let go. And so we spent the 2 hours with him, and I got to wrap him up in a blankie. He wore his hat. They did his fingerprints and his footprints. They did all of that on paper. They gave me this that they had made, and that's his footprint. I have really small hands, so there's my thumb, and there's his footprint. And then right up here, there is a tiny piece of his hair. And it's really cool that they made that, because there are things that'll never, you never get to see them again. So it's one of my most prized possessions, being able to have that. Anyways, so they did all that. And then I remember somewhere in the motion, I don't know when, but I remember a guy coming in and giving me his business card, telling me that he was from the cemetery and that I needed to call him when I felt up to it about what to do with his body. But yeah, I got those couple hours with him. I rocked him, I sang to him, I cuddled him. And obviously Skylar did too. But that was it. And then they took him away, and I laid in the hospital until my levels were good enough to go home. I didn't want to be in the hospital anymore. And so as soon as my levels were okay enough to go home, they let us go home. I had to go home, like, make sure I had to get a blood pressure thing and watch my blood pressure and make sure it didn't go back up, and that my HELLP syndrome, which is what I ended up having, I had pre-eclampsia that turned into HELLP syndrome, didn't skyrocket again. Sorry, you guys, the weather is crazy and it's making all these weird noises in my house. But that is how stillbirth goes. We ended up going to the morgue a few days later, or the cemetery thing, and we had him cremated. About a week later, they gave us his ashes, and we have them in a container, and that's how a stillbirth happens. You labor your baby, you get some hours with them, and then you forever say goodbye. It is the hardest thing that I've ever gone through in my life, and I cannot even explain to you guys the amount of heartbreak that I had from that experience. Clearly, it still haunts me in the middle of the night. When I wake up, I think about him, and it breaks my heart every time. Now I'm going to end this on a happy note, but how do I explain? What was I gonna say? Okay, so ending this on a happy note, this is obviously what it does to me when I talk about it too much or too long and right day, but it did happen for a reason. I have 2 beautiful children now. They were the most scary pregnancies ever for me, but I have 2 beautiful children now, and my life wouldn't have played out the same if I wouldn't have lost him. And I have an extraordinary life. I could not be any happier. My life is the best, and so it had to play out. Things eventually got better, but it took a long time, and I'm gonna tell you guys in the next week's video about everything emotionally that I dealt with after his stillbirth, because you don't get better. I mean, you don't get better overnight. And so I guess tune in next week and you guys can hear about that. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening to Jaden's story. He was a beautiful, beautiful baby. He was little, I mean, his handprint on ours, really fast too. I'm not gonna show any pictures of him. People are very cruel on the internet, very cruel, and those are something that I want to stay innocent, and they can stay innocent not being shown to the world. So they're for my family and for us
to experience. You may every once in a while somehow catch it in the background of a vlog because we do have it on a shelf, but I've never just broadcasted his pictures because I want to keep them safe and keep them innocent and keep him mine. Alright, bye you guys.
Don't you dream impossible.